All right, welcome everyone. We're so happy to have you here today for the faculty colloquium. I'm just going to go ahead and briefly introduce our two presenters for today, and this is being recorded for others who were not able to attend. So one of our presenters is Dr. David Contasa, who is professor and chair of history here at the college. He is the author of multiple books that include topics of both national and international interest. And he is included in his publications are titles related to people, places, and issues in the Philadelphia region. So for example, some of his publications include Metropolitan Paradise, Philadelphia's Wissahickon Valley, and Suburb in the City, Chestnut Hill, Philadelphia. In addition to publishing multiple books, he has also written, produced, and appeared in several documentary films, some of which are related to the presentation today. Our other presenter is Dr. Hilton Oyamaguchi, who is an assistant professor of biology here at the college. Originally from Brazil, Hilton earned his undergraduate degree in biology and master's in ecology from the University of São Paulo before completing his doctoral degree in ecology and evolutionary biology at UCLA. Here at the college, Hilton teaches hand-on classes in ecology, evolution, conservation biology, and all of these courses he attempts to provide students with immersive experience outside in Wissahickon Park. So you can see the title of their talk today is related to the Wissahickon Valley, and they're going to be talking about some of their interactive story maps and related research and interests. All right, so without further delay, I'd like to introduce David and Hilton. Thank you so much.
So David, he has been working in the Valley for a long time. Wow, I think over 20 years, maybe 30 years. That said, he knows a lot about the environmental history of this place. When I came here in 2019, I was really glad to visit the Wissahickon Creek. We can just cross the street here and collect data, right? Like it has been quite fun, but I didn't understand much about the environmental history of this place. And by doing this collaboration has been really wonderful for me to learn about the environmental history, understand what happened in the past, to see what happened in the present, and also to try to make projections in the future. So in the first part, David is going to talk about the environmental history of this place. And the second part, I'm gonna show this interactive map story that I worked on last year to engage more these students on these environmental issues, right? Like bring close to the reality and to basically for them to understand how close these climate issues is close to them and to us, right? Like, so David can start.
This is a Lenape gentleman named Lapuenska, and he was painted by a Swedish artist in 1735, and so it gives you some idea of what the native people looked like here. They were a Stone Age people, and I don't mean that in a pejorative kind of way. They did not have any metal tools. They didn't have metal saws or axes, and this is because they came across what we call the Bering Straits now 12 or 14,000 years ago, and that's before the metallurgical revolution occurred in the Eurasian Peninsula. And of course, there it would have gone back and forth and back and forth. So they're isolated here after that pathway ceases to exist. Next. They were agriculturalists in the sense that actually they were more horticulturalists. They planted the three sisters, and you can see them there, the corn or the maize and the beans and the squash. And by cooking the beans and the corn together, it released a lot of protein. I'm not sure they knew why, but that's indeed what happened. And they also supplemented their diet with hunting and gathering, so they were extremely well nourished. This is a farm near Germantown, and you can see there are two things there that Native Americans did not have. Anybody want to volunteer? What do you see in the photograph that the Lenape did not have and that put them at a disadvantage? Horses. And what else? Yeah, and wheels. And again, this is because they left before the invention of wheels in the Eurasian Peninsula and before they had domesticated horses. There had been a horse, a small horse-like creature, the fossil remains suggest that, in the Americas, but it went extinct. So they're really at a disadvantage against the Europeans. They have to haul everything themselves on their backs or drag them along. This is a photograph in a tributary of the Wissahickon, and you'll notice that the hillsides are completely denuded. And this is disastrous because there's going to be all kinds of runoff down into the creek. The only way that the Lenape could cut down trees is to girdle them. It is to go around and cut off all the bark so none of the nutrients could go up into the trees. And then after they dried out, they could put a fire around the bottom and then wrap above that with skins that had been soaked in water. So they're not going to be able to cut down very many trees. And the Europeans, with their saws and their axes, can just devastate entire forests. This is a map of the 30 or so mills in the Wissahickon Valley as of the 1770s. And altogether, there were about 50 mills between the source of the Wissahickon Creek and its mouth down at the Schuylkill River. They didn't all exist at the same time. There were 25 of them between here and East Falls, just in that section of the Wissahickon between our site and the mouth of the Wissahickon. And these mills did a great deal of damage. There were all kinds of mills. There were sawmills, textile mills, paper mills, and so forth. And the paper mills were particularly bad because they used lye to take the dyes out of fabrics. The paper was made of linen rags, by the way, and there's an interesting synergy there. They grew flax in Germantown and then wove linen clothing, and then when the clothing wore out, they sold it to the rag dealers, took it down to the Wissahickon and shredded it and pulverized it and made it into paper. And so there are all kinds of effluents that are going into the creek. The sawmills are very bad, and so are the grist mills, for that matter. And this is the Upper Livesey Mill. It was a grist mill, and this is a photo in 1889, just before Fairmount Park tore it down. It's a rather beautiful structure, as many of these mills were. But they were put out of commission by the mills in Manayunk because there's a canal coming down and a train coming down, bringing coal from the coal fields up in northern Pennsylvania, and they're able to generate steam and run the mills in that way. But notice the hillside is also denuded behind this mill, and there's a housing development now that was put there in the 1960s, which only exacerbated the runoff from that hillside. The miller's house, which is over on the left-hand side, is still there, but that's all that's left of the mill. Go ahead. And this is the mill dam at Chestnut Hill College. Some of you may know that there was a mill dam and a mill pond here. And there were 3 paper mills on this property, one on this side of the bridge and 2 other on the other side of Germantown Avenue in what we call Harper's Meadow. They were the DeWeese paper mills. They were the second paper mills in North America, and they were built in the 1730s. And at one point, the Sisters of St. Joseph owned the property across the street. I think it was maybe sold in the 1890s. But this is a whole story about the mill dam being taken down and so forth. Go ahead. By the middle of the 1800s, artists are fascinated by the beauty of the Wissahickon. And this is by Thomas Moran. It's called Autumn on the Wissahickon. It's painted in 1864. He exaggerates the heights of the hills, and you'll notice that the people seem to disappear into the background, which is on purpose because they're being engulfed. And this is a part of this whole wider romantic transcendental movement in the mid-19th century, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And this is also by Moran. It's called On the Wissahickon near Chestnut Hill, and I'm guessing this is behind Sugarloaf because as you look down the creek, you see the bridge at Bells Mill Road, and there were some mills on the other side. So this is a rather dreamy, beautiful painting by Moran. He went out west, by the way, later on and painted the Grand Canyon and other places like that. So he's very famous. Next. This is called On the Wissahickon. They seem to like this title, by James Hamilton. It was painted in 1843. And what it shows, I think, are erosions on the banks on either side, which shows that the Wissahickon has become a flashy stream. And by that I mean there's a lot of runoff from the sides, and so the creek floods and gouges out the hillsides. And then at other times when it doesn't rain much, it sort of dries up. And this has been caused by farming on the sides of the creek and by the mills and so on. And that's also a problem here at the college, as we know. This is one of my favorites. It's a paddle boat that would take visitors from where the art museum is now, what they called Fairmont, and you could come up to the mouth of the Wissahickon because the dam down at the waterworks created a kind of a pool or a lake there. And there was a nice landing in a little park, which no longer exists. What's down there now is a paint store and one of these relay stations that belongs to Pico, I think. And it's unfortunate that the Park Commission didn't buy up some of that land down there. It's sort of hideous in many ways. But anyway, people could take this paddle boat up and then they could walk up along the creek or probably engage a carriage to take them up the creek. Okay. And this is the Valley Green Inn, by the way, which looked very different when it was built in 1850. One of the innkeepers, Gaspar Lopez, said that Washington and Lafayette had stopped there for dinner on the way home from the Battle of Germantown. Well, it didn't exist until 1850, so there's no way that that occurred. The colonial dames got a hold of it in 1901 and made it look like a colonial inn. And I've heard people standing out there saying, oh, this is an old colonial inn, isn't it beautiful, and so forth, and it's really fake colonial. But the point is that there were about 8 of these inns along the Wissahickon at one time. Only one of them, in a sense, exists up this way, and the other one is down on Lincoln Drive, which you've probably gone past. It's been a police station and various kinds of things. And they were notorious for serving catfish and waffles, and I'm hoping they didn't get the fish out of the stream. And they washed them down with copious amounts of whiskey and beer and all kinds of alcoholic beverages. And when the Park Commission took over, the mills had to go out of existence because they couldn't sell liquor any longer. Okay. This is a photograph showing increasing industrialization on the banks of the Schuylkill in 1872, and our water supply came from the Schuylkill. It still does. We're drinking Schuylkill punch up here at Chestnut Hill College, and it was becoming more and more polluted. So one of the reasons for extending parkland along the Wissahickon was to protect the water supply. Another reason was to give people from the city an outlet to stroll into the park, and particularly along the Wissahickon, it would help them physically and spiritually and psychologically and so forth, to be immersed in nature and have this transcendental experience. Anyway, that's what the embankments of the Schuylkill looked like about the time that the Fairmont Park Commission is created in 1867. Okay. And that's the Fairmont Waterworks. This area was called Fairmount all the way back in the colonial period because it was a mount that was fair. And the waterworks dates from 1811. It's the oldest waterworks, municipal waterworks, I think, certainly in the United States and maybe even in North America. And Frederick Graff, who was the engineer of the waterworks, planted the area beautifully, and people would come up from the city and stroll around. So that's really the beginning of Fairmont Park because it's officially a park. They didn't filter and chlorinate the water. They just pumped it up into a reservoir, and you can still see the stone sides of the reservoir at the art museum. The art museum's down in the reservoir. And so the dirt would settle to the bottom of the reservoir, and they had a paddle wheel to pump the water up. Go ahead. This is a map of Fairmont Park I think from 1872, and you can see East and West Park, and then there's skinny little Wissahickon Park at the top. They had to bend it around to get it into the map. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Next. Okay. This is one of my favorite. It's called An Outing on the Wissahickon in 1903, and it's amazing. They're all dressed up to go along and have this outing on the Wissahickon. It's a staged photograph, obviously. Next. And this is Devil's Pool, which is at the mouth of Gresham Creek. It's a tinted postcard from about 1905, and it has this nice rustic bridge across it. And the stone bridge behind there is an intercepting sewer to intercept sewers from Chestnut Hill and Mount Airy so the stuff doesn't go into the creek, but they made it look like a graceful ridge. Next. And this is one of my favorite photographs. It's an outing at Devil's Pool around 1890, and they're all dressed up in their finery and so forth, and they're down there by Devil's Pool. It looks like some of them are courting, I'm guessing. Next. And I like to show this photograph. Hilton likes it too. It's ice skating behind the second Robeson Mill Dam near Ridge Avenue in 1910. I don't know that that creek has ever frozen over that solidly since I've been here so that you could skate there. And I think that tells us a lot about climate change, what is occurring even in this area. Next. And cars are beginning to cause problems in the park, and people wanted to drive along what we call Forbidden Drive. This is on a tributary. This is taken about 1905. And people in Germantown, Mount Airy, and Chestnut Hill began to take up petitions in 1910 to try to get the Park Commission to forbid cars in the park. And the mayor said, if you're really serious about this, why don't you have an equestrian demonstration? And that's the beginning of the Wissahickon Day Parade. This one's in 1940. And it's not as complete and fulsome and so forth as this is now. They used to have a lot of famous people there. Hopalong Cassidy came, who was a well-known Western star. Tom Mix came in the 1920s. Sally Starr, who was well-known here in Philadelphia, was in that. And that's taken from the Valley Green Inn. Next. All right. These are Canadian hemlocks. Photograph is 1865, and it tells you something about their origin. And they grew thickly on the north and east-facing slopes, and they now are afflicted by an insect called the woolly adelgid, which came in from Japan. Many of the diseases come in from Asia. We're on a similar latitude in a similar biome, and of course a lot of invasives come in too. And they're also being damaged by a urban heat island effect, and I'm not sure that they're going to survive. All right, and this is called Nutting Day. It's from 1878, and kids got out of school then to collect chestnuts on the heights of the Wissahickon, and the chestnuts grew pretty near the top where it was sort of well drained. And Carol Franklin's mother remembers when she was a girl that in June, when the chestnuts blossomed, it was like the hillside was covered with snow. There was something like 4 billion chestnut trees between New England and Georgia. The blight started in 1904 in New York City. It reached here in 1914, and that's one of the reasons that the Friends of the Wissahickon were founded. And the chestnuts were a very important food source for the Lenni Lenape and also for Europeans who came here. It must have been fun to collect the chestnuts. Go ahead. Now, I thought that that drawing was rather exaggerated about the size of the chestnut trees, but that's how big they actually were. They were huge trees, and the idea was to cross them with Asian chestnut trees that had fatter nuts, and this would produce more of an abundance here, but they brought a blight in with them. And so the trees, they're sprout hardwoods. They sprout here and there, but that's another story altogether. And I need to worry about that. That's a wild turkey, and wild turkeys like the chestnuts too. And they disappeared like a lot of other animals. There were actually woodland buffalo in this area at one point. We could go on and on about the animals that disappeared. And this is kudzu, which the U.S. Department of Agriculture brought into this country for animal feed, and it just takes over everything. So these kinds of exotics are really a problem. This is the Andorra Shopping Center, and it goes in the 1950s. No porous paving. There's terrible runoff from these parking lots, not only water, but antifreeze leaking out of cars and oil leaking out of cars and so forth. And the next slide shows you what it does, what the runoff did behind the shopping center. Just gouges out this little rivulet, this little creek next. And this, of course, is the campus here with the flooding that ripped out the embankments, and I think Hilton's going to talk about that a little bit more later. Next. Believe it or not, this is the source of the Wissahickon Creek up at Montgomeryville. It's rather bucolic with the cows and so forth. And next, that's what the source looks like now, that it's under the parking lot of the Montgomery Mall, all right? And next, and if you put your ear down there, you can actually hear the creek gurgling beneath this vent. And it wouldn't have been allowed a few years later. The DEP wouldn't have allowed anything like that. It's put in pipes and so forth as it goes to a development next. And so I think there is hope, though, because the Friends of the Wissahickon and other groups have organized a lot of volunteers to work in the Wissahickon. So I'm going to end on a positive note there.
So as you can see, we do have a really interesting environmental history. And here we are in the present with this climate crisis. And when we talk even for ourselves, right, like we feel this reality distant from us. It's getting closer, right? Like, but how do we make the students more interested and engaged into this topic? That was my question when I started like teaching here. When I joined here in 2019, I was really lucky to be able just to walk and again be in the creek, right? Like, but how we can make these students to understand these environmental issues and bring to the reality. That was my question. And I decided to work on this interactive map where students, they are all the time online, right? Like, so that would be a way to engage them. And second, show the environmental issues that Philadelphia we face, right? And the third, the idea also is to engage the students to produce content, right? Like, instead of just being consumers of this online content, they could also produce some of this content by bringing these students outdoors and see what we have out there and creating those contents. And here, I want just to share you like some of these interactive map that I produced, right? Like, so here we have the urban heat island effect, which it is an issue here in Philadelphia and many other metropolitan areas. And what it is a region where we have this concentration of concrete, asphalt, and we replace like all the vegetation. We have ACs, we have like cars running everywhere, right? Like, so all these activities plus conversion of land led to a warmer temperature than the surrounding areas. And that said, as you can see, this is not evenly affected, right? Like, neighborhood where we do have less trees are the ones that's going to be most affected, like West Philly, like downtown South Philly, North Philly are the regions that are going to, are already being affected the most. And how this is related to climate change. It's easy to connect, right? Like, it's easy to talk about urban heat island effect because we can feel, if you drive downtown, you're gonna feel the difference. And how is being aggravated by climate change. We have heat waves. And during those heat waves, walking in South Philly, I see like the leaves burnt, right? Like, oftentimes I see dead birds on the sidewalk, but how is affecting human health? As you can see in those neighborhoods, elderly people, young kids, right, like pregnant women, people with chronic disease, workers that work outdoors are the most affected, right? Like, so climate change is not affecting evenly. It depends on where you are, you're gonna be affected the most. The intention here is not to create anxiety, is also to create hope, because oftentimes, even I'm teaching climate change, and oftentimes we see all these environmental issues that we face, but we also need to bring hope. And I also posted like some of these layers here, the Wissahickon area that creates a buffer. Anyways, I'm going to jump into the story map instead of showing the layers that I created. I can share these links for the students also to explore, but I created this story map too. And finally, let me just show the flooding areas. These are the flooding areas that's already happening right now, and it's going to be aggravated by climate change, right? Here on campus, a couple of years ago, we had this flood, right? And it's going to be more intense and more frequent. That said, let's show this story map. Hopefully, it's going to work well. But here it is, right? Like we do have a hot city. Yes, there are a lot of environmental issues, but also we already have cool solutions for these problems, right? Like Philadelphia, it's a big city. As I mentioned, there are like several environmental issues. Here is downtown. I was trying to work on the Google Studio to create this animation where the students could like navigate into these areas, right? Like see this densely populated area. And then the next stage would be flying towards the Wissahickon. And I need to do some video editing to connect that. But anyways, the next step is to show that, yes, we do have already the solutions. We don't need to create new inventions, right? Like we have this forest that serve as a temperature buffer. It's a carbon sink. It does give protection to the watershed and does create and generate like people like to visit this area, especially after the pandemic. It created a lot of demand, and I actually frequent more these parks than before the pandemic, right? Like, so it is a really nice area, and we are really lucky to be in this area. Anyways, and here you can interact with this map by looking at these trees, and here we have Pennypack too, right? And then here is the next video where you can see the dimension of this forest. It's a little bit deceiving when you look at from the top. I mean, when you're driving under, it doesn't feel that big, but as you can see, it's massive. It is pretty impressive that we were able to conserve this area in this metropolitan area. And how can so we do have a lot of issues in this park, right? Like, but it does provide all these ecosystem services. We have native, for sure, there are a lot of non-native too, which I'm learning quite a lot about those non-native too. And how can I engage these students like by combining this interactive map and bringing them outdoors, right? Like in my class, Ecology and Evolution, I made a challenge to them. And has been really interesting for the fact that we complain that they have a short attention span. And I do complain quite a lot because you can't talk about 10, 20 minutes and they drift away, right? Like, and it's not their fault. We are constantly being bombarded by information, right? But then I put the challenge for them to create some of those contents. And I was a little bit surprised that they didn't know in the beginning how to deal with technology because they are consumer, not producers. But then they did. I mean, you're gonna see here, I just want to share a few of these videos. Hopefully you can hear. But this is one is about the Wissahickon. And all those images are taken from them, right? Like, And they were using also this iNaturalist app to learn about what they were seeing, right? And they did this interesting exercise where they have to learn a lot of skills, right? Like technology skills, identifying plants, and putting together a story, right? And I was really happy with the results. And here is another one that was the American toad. Actually, when we went outside, we saw a bunch of them reproducing in the creek right there. And here is another one.
This little cutie is one of the most common amphibians in North America. You've probably seen them in your backyard or heard them calling in the summer. These toads are essential to the food chain. Their tadpoles consume algae and debris, and the adults consume worms and insects. But their diet and habitat makes them susceptible to pesticides and runoff. Too much algae chokes out both the babies and the adults. Additionally, the butcher fungus affects the species of pyrenes. American toads are one of the most well-known amphibians in the United States. Let's work to keep it that way.
Anyways, Greg, he created a channel for us where we fed like all these social media posts in the corridor you're gonna see like being presented. And here is our channel. There is later on I can share the link to this story map, right? Like so you can explore a little bit more. I'm not gonna keep playing out these videos, but I was really surprised. And this place, right, like we do have a really nice creek and it's been protected, but we do have this urban region that like people visit, bring invasive species. There are a lot of also environmental issues within this park, right? Like, and here it is, I was also surprised that two of these students last year, they got these pods, native seeds. They got like actually some of native plants in a garden somewhere here. I don't know exactly from where. And they made a video of them removing the garlic mustard, which is invasive. And then they were like planting these trees. And one of the students also got a drone. And here's the results.
Never being noticed and afraid of being seen, but I can finally eat and I can fall asleep. It's fine, fine, fine. I finally got soda, said the time the night showed up. Now the weight of the world ain't that bad.
Gonna just show one more.
That's not what we're supposed to be looking at. I saw the air, just like in the middle. I got a paper pen and a pen in those things. There's a hole in my head, prescription medication, and forgot how to cry. Who am I? Who am I to complain?
And I was really surprised because one of these students wasn't engaged in my lectures, but then when I gave this challenge, there was like suddenly he brought like some plants and I was like, can we do this? I was like, well, let's do it, and then nobody's gonna complain about it, right? But anyways, it was really surprising to me. Anyways, there is also this spotted lanternfly in 2019. I worked with other students and we did like this spotted lanternfly video. Later on you can click and watch. But again, I was trying to create like this story map where we can include all the student work, our work into this backbone, right? Like, so that was the main idea. And finally, this one, David and I, we are teaching this IDHP course, and Glenda and Elizabeth, they did a wonderful job in summarizing all this urban heat island effect in Philadelphia. It is about 4 minutes video, but I think it's worth it to watch just to see the effort that they are putting into these videos, and it is enlightening, right? Like to see these students engaged. Here it is.
Have you noticed that even on a November evening, the temperatures are warm enough to make you peel your jacket off? With today's climate crisis, temperatures are getting hotter and hotter. Wouldn't it be great if there was a way of lowering temperatures? There is.
Here in Northwest Philly, we have nature's own air conditioning, the Wissahickon Valley. Spanning 1,800 acres, the valley supplies a temperature buffer from Chestnut Hill to Manayunk. These areas are up to 10 degrees cooler than other areas such as Center City, Philadelphia. This is a result of the urban heat island effect. As stated by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, urban areas where concrete structures are more present than greenery experience increased temperatures.
Now, what causes the urban heat island effect? Well, it's a combination of reduced natural landscapes in urban areas, urban material properties, urban geometry, heat generated from human activities, and weather and geography. These factors can be readily seen in local areas such as Center City, Philadelphia, where we see less vegetation, the use of asphalt, the burning of fossil fuels, and increased temperatures. These factors produce hotter temperatures in the area in comparison to those surrounding it.
Now that we know what causes the urban heat island effect, let's talk about how exactly this happens. Let's examine the first cause, reduced natural landscapes. This simply means that a certain area lacks vegetation and greenery. When talking about reducing temperatures in an urban place, plants are essential in doing so because they provide shade, transpire water from plant leaves, and are an evaporating surface for water, which in turn cools the air. So, in areas where plants are not abundant, they lack the most efficient way of reducing the temperature and thus contribute to the urban heat island effect.
The lush vegetation is usually replaced with urban material properties that lack the cooling properties of vegetation. In fact, these materials do the opposite of reducing the temperature and instead absorb heat.
Another key factor is how our cities are set up. When thinking of a city such as New York City, you can picture the narrow streets and seemingly endless skyscrapers. It almost resembles a canyon, right? When temperatures are hot, this essentially becomes an urban canyon that traps heat and blocks natural wind flow, which contributes to the urban heat island effect.
While it would be nice to always have clear skies, the urban heat island effect is worsened by them. Due to the lack of cooling systems within the urban areas, the clear skies only worsen the temperature of the urban areas by emitting heat that is absorbed and trapped. Lastly, and most notably, are our actions that produce large amounts of heat. Things such as vehicles, air conditioning units, and industrial facilities all generate heat that is trapped within the urban area. This negative effect is exacerbated in cities where it is densely populated and more people practice these harmful activities.
One of the most cost-efficient ways to reduce the heat island effect is by having increased vegetation in urban areas, which lowers surface and air temperatures through shade, evapotranspiration, and collecting water from rainfall on their leaves and soil. You may ask yourself, is it really that bad if we don't take care of the Wissahickon? Well, with less vegetation, the urban heat island effect worsens, and thus temperatures rise as a result. And with a rise in temperatures, there will be an increased need for air conditioning, which will exacerbate climate change. Also, higher temperatures result in increased hospital admissions for heat-related illnesses, cardiovascular, and respiratory disorders. And if the health issues weren't enough, an increase of pavement maintenance is required in areas with less trees, as shade slows the deterioration of pavement, thus also impacting the area financially.
Have we scared you yet? Good. Deforestation and rising temperatures must be confronted, especially now as climate change plagues our world and exacerbates these issues. The bright side is that action is feasible and does not come in only one form. We can lower the impacts of the urban heat island effect by ditching mowed lawns and planting more vegetation and trees, installing green or coal roofs and pavement. If you are unable to implement these changes for one reason or another, volunteering is another way of getting involved and helping to protect vegetation. At a local level, the Friends of the Wissahickon provide many volunteer opportunities in an effort to sustain and better the Wissahickon.
Any action is better than none, so get out there and help to lower temperatures and maintain our beautiful Wissahickon Valley.
Yeah, we were like really proud of these two students that worked really hard on this project.
And our first year students.
Mm-hmm. And that said, right, like about a year ago, we presented these faculty colloquium talking about the environmental history of this place, right? Like this, especially the honor student from last year, they presented about these 6 properties along the valley that like they were looking at environmental history. And here, so in this case here, the question is, how did we get to this present moment, right? Like basically we need to understand the past, like look at the environmental history of this place to have insights about the present moment, right? Like, and are we doing better? Are we doing worse? So we see areas like kind of catastrophic scenario, right? Like, but by looking at, again, should I play this?
Just a tiny bit of it.
Yeah, this is just show the 6 areas that they did. We presented in the last year, but it took a lot of time for us to work on this. So why not, right? So those are the 6 properties that the students from last year, they were doing this study about the environmental history of each one of those properties. One that is Chestnut Hill College, then Morris Arboretum.
That's 1928. And that's about 1910.
And now we are moving towards Upper Roxborough, where we have this housing development that happened after Second World War. And that's West Chestnut Hill, where they preserved quite a lot.
That's the Woodward property called Chrisheim. And that's Cerdenheim Farm, yeah. That's where the Andorra Nursery was. It's now housing development.
Yeah, that's the Andorra Nursery.
That's what it looked like before the housing development.
Anyways, so the last year they were looking at all these variables, natural resources, economic development in different periods of time, or like technology, how technology influencing the development of those regions, ownership, ideology, right? Like all those factors were key to preserve or develop certain areas of the valley. And if you're interested in watching the faculty colloquium last year, you can go here and click and watch. We are not going to talk more about that, but one challenge that I was thinking about is like, how can you summarize that into images, right? Like, so we spend a lot of time collecting this historical material. We went to the archives, and here it is, like, so we were trying to collect this historical material. This is aerophotography from 1942. And on the right side here, we have Morris Arboretum. On the left side, we have the Chestnut Hill College. And then this is an interactive way that you can see what happened from there to nowadays. And the question, are we doing better or worse? The Morris Arboretum, their economy depends on basically preserving, right? Like, and making advertisement about their vegetation. And as you can see here, sliding this, you see that like this farmland, actually vegetation regrowth. They built this pond here, and they use as an advertisement to bring visitors to that place. And Dave maybe can talk a little bit about the architecture.
It's a former wetland that John Morris had filled in so his cows could eat the grass down there. And about 15 years ago, Carol Franklin's firm, Andrew Pogan Associates, restored the wetland, and there are a lot of waterfowl there now. And you also notice that they have allowed the forest to grow up along the Wissahickon Creek on their side of it, as well as along a little tributary of the creek. And so it's much more forested than it would have been or was in 1942.
And at Chestnut Hill College, in the places that we didn't do anything, you see that the vegetation regrowth. Nature is resilient, right? Like along the creek, there are several places, even the place where I think used to be a soccer field or tennis court.
Tennis court, yes.
You see that's like now it's revegetated. Right?
And we mowed that area for a while until there was a flood, and then all kinds of boulders washed up there, and we stopped mowing it, and the forest came back. So we have more trees in some ways than we did.
And again, college with after Second World War with like car culture, right? Like we had to build parking lots, we had to build the infrastructure to expand the college, right? Like so, we depended on this infrastructure to expand our facilities to receive more students, right? Like so. Anyways, here it is just a contrast for you to explore before and after, and Dave is going to
Just wanted to call your attention to that Serpentine Road over at the Morris Arboretum. Again, Andrew Pogan Associates did that. The entrance used to be over on Hillcrest Avenue, some of you will remember, and so when they had this new entrance from Wissahickon Avenue, they had to come up with a road so that there's not a lot of water rushing down, and so what they did is to create this serpentine road. And I talked to Colin Franklin when he was doing it, and he was constantly dissatisfied with his drawings and did it over and over and over again. So what happens is that the water runs down a bit, and then it will go off to the side and then run down a little bit and off to the side and so forth. So it's a wonderful example of a road that keeps the water from ruining the hillside and washing all sorts of things down onto the avenue.
Yeah, and by the way, just like presenting this material, like that the students worked on, generated a lot of discussions, and then now we are in this committee discussing with like Sister Karen and Bob here, like, and several of us are discussing about the restoration of the creek, right? Like, so I think it's important to bring this environmental history to understand what happened in the past to restore what we can, right? Oops. So now this is the contrast between Upper Roxborough and Chestnut Hill side, right? Like, and maybe David can.
It's interesting that the same family owned both sides of the Wissahickon Creek, the Houston family, and the family donated a huge piece of what had been the Andorra nurseries in the early 1970s. The Roxborough side was developed in the post-World War II period, and I think it could have been developed differently because that development over there forms a wall against the park instead of allowing the trees of the park to filter up through it, which is what happens on the west side of Chestnut Hill and the west side of Mount Airy.
Here you can see the contrast, right? Like, and again, look at the farmland. If you just leave it alone, it's going to regenerate.
Right.
For sure, we need to manage the invasive species, but it does regenerate. But here's the contrast between the Upper Roxborough
and what they planted there were invasive trees. They planted blue spruces and ornamental trees from Asia and so forth instead of native trees, and that's what developers tend to do because they look pretty. And if you're familiar with Henry Avenue, it's extraordinarily different from Lincoln Drive on the other side. Henry Avenue is finished in the 1950s to look like a double-lane divided highway or like an interstate highway, whereas Lincoln Drive follows the contours of the land. It actually follows Paper Mill Creek, and you have a very different kind of experience. And Henry Avenue actually cuts the rest of the community off from the park, whereas Lincoln Drive does not. Park filters up into the community. And Lincoln Drive was, though, built in the early 20th century. It was started in the 1890s before automobiles are coming through, and they're seeing it as a drive for carriages.
And now this is under a nursery. Here's the college, and here it is the contrast. And maybe you can.
The Andorra Nursery, by the way, was the largest tree nursery in the eastern half of the United States. It was 1,400 acres. It went from just over here at the end of Northwestern Avenue up to Ridge and Butler Pike. And they sold the nursery in 1960, but there was a large part of it just up the road from here along Thomas Road. And you can see in this that you have nursery stock on the black and white one. And then you have a housing development replacing it down here. And actually it's better grown up in some ways with trees than when it was just a tree nursery.
And if you go for a hike in that area, you can still see a lot of the Japanese maples and non-native species going from that time.
Yeah, it's full of bamboo, and it's full of Japanese maples and so forth that have taken over in various parts.
And finally, the contrast here, we have the housing development area. The other part of the nursery, or like here on the right, Erdheim Farm. And here was the nursery, which you can already see that was degraded, right? Like, and now we have this housing area.
Which has a lot of trees.
Which has a lot of trees, which
Unlike the city, yes.
Right. And at Erdheim Farm, later on, you can slide to, and they are doing a great job also restoring the vegetation along the creek, right? So the key question is like, are we doing better or worse? Are we doing a good job in preserving this forest? And when you look at, this is a sliding map, like this is 1940, and this is 2010, right? Like, as you can see, we added a lot of reserves. We protected the tributaries, and in red, there's like the new trails that were added to the Wissahickon Valley, right?
It started out as 400 acres in 1867, and now it's 1,800 acres, and so there has been a lot of land added to it over the years.
Look at the contrast here. That was...
That's the 1867.
And then when you slide, it does give hope that we're like, we are protecting the areas that are important.
At one point, the Park Commission thought of adding 2,000 acres on the Roxborough side, which they did not do. And they could have had the land for almost nothing because it was farmland.
Just finalize, right? Like all these factors, natural resources, economic development, technology, ownership, like every single owner along this creek, like the ones that donated the land to protect the forest, right? Like influencing the protection of this area. So I think we are in a period of time that we are concerned about these environmental issues, and hopefully we're going to shift towards protecting and developing areas, right? So that said, here it is, our story map plus the environmental history of the Wissahickon, and we want to say thank you for you to come in here. Several people helped with this project. Well, we need to say thank you for the Faculty Development Committee, because I took a time release from one course to develop this story map, the IDHG program and the IDHP students who were like participating to this project, biology department, and Joe for being really flexible in allowing me to take this time to work on this project. Karen Franklin and David Contasta for providing out this rich environmental history and material from the Wissahickon, right? Like Bob provided a lot of these images and the maps, and also Chestnut Hill Conservancy, where we did a lot of research on this aerial photography. So we are open to questions and comments, improvements.
Quisican Valley continuing to expand, or have you run into a residential wall where you're not going to be able, they're not going to be able to attain any more acreage?
I think it's unlikely that much more acreage is going to be donated. There might be tiny pieces here and there. A lot of this happened in the early 20th century. The whole Gresham Creek expansion occurred then because there were some wealthy landowners who turned it over, so I doubt it. Any other questions or comments?
This is a crude question, but I mean, at some point, what's important is having vegetation, not necessarily whether it's historical or invasive. You know, at what point do you just throw in the towel on trying to like restore the chestnuts and just let anything grow that will grow because it's better than concrete?
That's a good point. It is true, and that's one of the questions. Once the invasives come, it's impossible. After a certain, you just need to manage, and then eventually you just accept like that it's part of this new ecosystem, right? Do we want to restore the old chestnut? There are programs that they are doing like some hybrids. It's not even the ones that. The original, and I think we just need to shift this mindset that's like we just need this carbon sink, right? Like that, like is going to provide all this ecosystem service. But it's a good point. That's like we need to shift that mentality of going back. Right.
There's also a lot of attention on mini forests, and there's been a lot of literature about that, particularly in Europe. They're doing in a lot of cities so that you could have a mini forest of about 1/2 acre in places that are abandoned. And I think that's a very good idea for the city of Philadelphia.
What's the movement towards more permeable turf, like the surfaces? Like, is it just too expensive for places to redo their parking lot?
It is fairly expensive. Morris Arboretum did a very good job. Do you want to add to that?
I mean, to change the infrastructure is quite expensive, right? But again, by having more permeable areas, I think that's the key. But converting those areas, maybe when we are in desperation mode, we might replace. But right now, there is like the trade-off between costs, right? Like maybe in the future, this permeable asphalt is going to be the new future.
And so, then I just try to squint sometimes and think like, what could it look like in 50 years? Like if we had permeable surfaces and the little, what do you call them,
Microforests.
Like, it could look quite different, but.
And in Berlin, I think they've actually allowed a forest to grow up in an old railroad station and along old railroad lines. It's another place where it would be evident to do something like that.
Yeah, sometimes I think we missed the boat. I mean, Mother Nature ripped up our lower lot 3 times. and instead of making the jump and putting a permeable lot there, we just packed pavement over it. Yeah. And I think by this point, maybe hopefully we get the point that it's it's going to get ripped up again at some point.
The creek's going to come back.
Yeah. Like putting a gravel lot in, that's going to get washed.
Yes.
Down there. Yeah. But there are lots of other types of permeable surfaces that are very stable that you can use.
Yeah.
When your students do plant identification, are they using like online identification apps?
Yes, especially there is one other app that's called Seek that helps with identification. It does make mistakes. I'm not also a plant specialist, but for me, that's like I've been here since 2019. I'm learning by looking at, and if I'm curious, I can collect and then get a book and trying to go in more in depth. But the current students, they don't open books anymore. So this is like an easy way to.
Well, I gotta tell you, I mean, before we had these lovely apps, we used to do it, and the books aren't really set up to help you find something if you don't already know what it is.
Yes, yes.
You literally have to page through them until you find something that looks like that. You know?
And that's what I mentioned, like the barrier of entry nowadays with all this technology, with iNaturalist app, it's not just a image recognition thing. They're like, it's a network of people that like nature, even curator, and that they identify for you. And that's what I say is like before to buy one of those macroinvertebrate book, I checked it was $70. And students are not gonna buy that to learn about macroinvertebrates. And here you have like a supercomputer in your hand that you take a picture, put to the cloud, and then you have the instant like feedback. I love it. Any more questions? Thank you. Thank you, everybody.